Good morning, boys and girls. Today is Wednesday, and today we're going to be talking about sequence. Now, sequence happens in lots of nonfiction text. So let's take a look first at your goal for today. Your goal for today is going to be able to explain events in a text based on the order in which they occur. So you will be able to identify a sequence of events in a text. You'll be able to tell what happened first, second, third, so on and so forth. Now, what exactly does sequence mean? Now, sequence is a part of how a text is organized. So think about your life and how your life is organized. You were born at birth, and now you're about 9 or 10. There was a sequence of events that led from the time you were born all the way till today. Now, in a text, authors use sequence to present information in time order. So they tell what happened first, second, just like I mentioned before. Kind of like your life, right? You would tell your life in order. You would probably start with your birthday and probably maybe list some things that happened all the way up until today. Now let's talk about understanding sequence. Now, I kind of already gave you a hint and let you know how sequence works, but here it is for you to see too. You're going to be looking for some signal words in text. So words like first, next, last, finally. And also, sequence of events can happen by using specific dates. Now, as we go through the reading, you'll hear some maybe specific dates, things like first, then, and last to help you understand a text. Now, let's practice a sequence of events. We're going to talk about how fruit decays. Now, fruit decays in a certain order, and we learned that yesterday in the text that we read. Let me take you back to page 355 to the section that talks about how fruit decays. All right, so this is the section on page 355 from the text, Your World Up Close. Now, this particular page does talk about how fruit decays. Let's read it one more time together. Pay attention to signal words that are happening that lead to a sequence of how fruit decays. So we're looking at the order of how fruit decays. Scientists use electron micrographs to see how objects change over time. For example, we can look at a piece of fruit to see how it decays. First, the fruit looks fresh. After a few days, it begins to soften. Then, specks of mold appear and cling to it. Days pass, and eventually the fruit is covered in mold. We can see these changes under the microscope far earlier than we can see them with just our eyes. Suppose you mingle outside on a humid day with friends. What would the sweat on your skin look like magnified? The possibilities are endless if you examine your world up close. So there is that text on 355. Let's look at the first paragraph and let's see if we can find some signal words that will show a sequence of events of how fruit decays. So this first sentence right here just gives us a little bit of information. The second sentence talks about how fruit is going to decay. You can see that signal word. It's going to tell you we can look at a piece of fruit to see how it decays. That's what we're looking for. We want to know how it decays. First, there's that signal word we talked about just a few minutes ago. First. First, the fruit looks fresh. After, there's another signal word. After a few days, it begins to soften. Then, there's another signal word. Specks of mold appear and cling to it. Days pass and eventually is also a key word that shows sequence. The fruit is covered in mold. There you go, boys and girls. There's the sequence of events of how strawberries start to show mold. Let's head back over and type in the sequence of how fruit decays. All right, let's go ahead and put the first thing that has to happen in order for fruit to decay. And you remember over in your text, it does say, first, the fruit looks fresh. So I'm just going to put it into my chart. first, the fruit looks fresh. Now, this arrow here signals that something else is going to happen, so I will put the next event in there. Now, if you remember, and if you don't, that's okay, which is why I put the text over on this side to help you out. After a few days, it begins to soften. That key word right there is after. So we have after a few days, the fruit begins to soften. And something else happens. That's right, let's look back over. Then specks of mold appear. So we'll put that. And then mold appears. Now, you'll notice I didn't write the whole thing because I'm trying to save some time. When you practice sequence of events, remember, you don't have to copy the text word for word. In fact, we would prefer if you put it in your own words. So first, the fruit looks fresh. After a few days, the fruit begins to soften, and then mold appears. And let's go back to our text and see what happens last. Days pass, and eventually the fruit is covered in mold. And again, I'm going to put it into my own words just because I think it makes more sense to me if I were to put more days go by and the fruit is covered in mold. I'm going to go in and add my periods. But that right there is an example of how fruit decays. Now, in order for fruit to decay, which means for it to go bad, it has to be fresh first, right? I mean, that's kind of a given. In order for fruit to go bad, it has to be fresh. After a few days, the fruit begins to soften and then mold appears. Now think back to fruit that you've seen in your refrigerator, right? It's in the fridge, it's fresh. If it sits there for a few days, it gets soft. Then you may see some mold if you haven't thrown it out. And then last, if more days go by and you still have the fruit, it'll be covered in mold. And you can see an example of those sequence of events in this photograph right here. You have a fresh piece of strawberry, and then this must happen after a few days. Some mold happens, and then it becomes completely covered in mold. Now, you are going to practice sequence of events when you head to Wonders and work on page 233 to 235. Now remember, a sequence of events happens in order. Don't forget to look for keywords like first, then, last, eventually. Even dates of time can signal a sequence of events that's happening in a text. All right, boys and girls, head to Wonders, complete page 233 to 235. As always, you may skip part B on page 235. I'll talk to you guys tomorrow.